Mi nombre es Cristina Fuentes, directora internacional del Hay Festival. Bienvenidos todos a este espacio donde estamos explorando con las grandes mentes de nuestros tiempos cómo imaginar el mundo después de la pandemia, a través de charlas y conversaciones con vuestras preguntas. Esto en colaboración con SURA, nuestro aliado regional para América Latina, y BBC Mundo. Conversemos con los que piensan nuestro futuro. Gracias.
Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, cualquiera que sea el uso horario en el que estén ustedes, nuestros queridos lectores y seguidores del Hay Festival y de BBC Mundo. Dentro del programa de conversaciones con grandes pensadores en medio de la cuarentena, hoy tenemos un invitado que no necesita presentación. Es el estadounidense Paul Krugman, Nobel de Economía del 2008, columnista desde hace 20 años en el New York Times y autor de múltiples libros. El último, que lanzó este año, fue lanzado simultáneamente en español, es Arguing with Zombies. En español se lanzó como Contra Zombies. Yo sí necesito presentación, soy Juan Carlos Pérez Salazar, editor de noticias y contenido en BBC Mundo. Ahora voy a empezar a hablar en inglés para conducir la conversación con el señor Paul Krugman. Mr. Krugman, thank you so much for being with us.
Sure, good to be on.
Yeah, I knew you were well known in Latin America, but I was really surprised by how popular you are among the readers because we received more than 400 questions in less than 24 hours after we were going to speak with you. So I'm going to divide this conversation like in four small chapters. First, talking about USA, then China, then a broad subject about capitalism, and at the end, Latin America, because we receive a lot of questions about our continent. So about what is happening in the US, it is impossible not to touch what is happening right now in your country. And actually, we receive a few questions about that. And one of them is by Alonso Rivera Morales, who says, could be the current crisis after the killing of George Floyd the trigger for reforms in the USA?
Yes, it's possible. I mean, it's very hard to guess what will happen politically, but it is striking that public opinion, despite the best efforts of Trump, public opinion is actually quite sympathetic to the demonstrators. On average, voters seem to agree that we have a really serious problem of structural racism, and it's possible. I mean, it's a very nerve-wracking time, and clearly we have some strong authoritarian impulses among people in charge, but it's possible that we'll emerge from this with some real reforms. And in general, I think the public is sensing that we need to do a lot of things differently in this country, and maybe that translates into political action.
Yes, actually, you devoted your last column in the New York Times about this subject. But actually, thinking about your presentation for the Hay Festival, what is happening right now adds the losing of credibility to the United States, no, around the world.
Oh yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, even if Trump is defeated in November and we have a realignment, for the United States has handled the pandemic extremely badly. We have clearly a current government that is fundamentally anti-democratic, and the fact that we could have put such people in charge, that we handled, that we've proven ourselves so incapable of dealing with actual policy crises, that's going to be that's going to cast a shadow on America for a long time. It's going to be very difficult for the United States to exert the kind of soft power, moral authority that it used to have. Take many years of proving ourselves again before we can do that. So right now, the United States is a diminished nation in the eyes of the world, and I think in the eyes of itself.
Yeah, touching on that, Maria Paz Perez Hernandez says, if there is any way that the United States can regain its hegemonic position.
Well, the United States is still a highly productive country with great diversity, a lot of creativity. There's a lot of underlying strength here. It's we are never going to be dominant in the world the way we were after World War II, but we could still be we offer a lot that no one else can. China is a powerful nation, but it is never going to be, unless there's a fundamental change in Chinese politics and society, it never has the prospect of being a world leader in the way that the US used to be. But we have a lot of ground to make up, and it's one, people don't trust the United States. I shouldn't say America, talking to a Latin American audience. People don't trust the United States because it has proved to be not true to its own ideals. They're right. We are, those of us who live here, who call it our country, are wondering if it's still the same country it used to be. So it's going to take time. But if we can get through this moment, then the strengths of the United States remain there. But it's a long road back.
And if Joe Biden wins and Trump loses?
Well, if Joe Biden wins, and actually crucially, if Democrats also control Congress after the election, then you're going to have a very, very different group of people making policy. It'd be a return of professionalism, return of idealism, but it's not. The fact of the matter is, we did in fact elect a authoritarian. We have one whole political party that is effectively opposed to the principles on which the United States was built, and until you can say definitively that not just that party has lost one election, but that those forces are no longer powerful in the United States, then it's not enough just to have better policies under the next administration, though God help us if we don't change management. But we need to convince ourselves and the world that we really have reformed.
Yeah. Joaquin Belloso asks if this could be the point of inflection for the USA to change its health system.
Well, let's put the thing about it, what people don't, I think, fully appreciate is how much progress we actually made, despite everything. And there's a lot of failure to appreciate just how much difference Obamacare made. And I actually still think that a single payer, if that's what your goal is, that's still very hard to get politically. That still requires, even with a Democratic Senate, that still seems to be a goal that is unlikely to be realized. But a massively enhanced Obamacare that effectively gets us to universal coverage, that's, I think if Democrats win in November, that's going to happen. We're going to have still a kind of complex, jerry-built system of health coverage, but it will be more generous and more enough to basically get us to what every other advanced country has, which is universal health care.
Do you think that after all this has happened, Trump and the Republicans will continue to try to dismantle Obamacare?
Yes. Oh, I think if Trump wins, they will. They'll still go there. I mean, it is remarkable that they're pursuing that, despite the fact that it's a deeply unpopular goal. But there are some fundamentally, modern Republican Party is opposed to the idea that people should be entitled to have essential health care. It fundamentally clashes with their view of the way the world should be. So it's an immovable goal on their part.
But that will mean that it will be a president and a party that will not learn anything of this crisis, because that's actually one of the main points about this crisis, the crisis of the healthcare system and the need to support it.
Oh, sure. I mean, if we didn't actually have Obamacare in place, if we didn't, we best estimates are that something like 27 million people have lost employer-based health insurance, but most of them have been picked up by through Obamacare, been picked up by the safety net. So this would have been an absolute nightmare without the existence of this program. And you would think that people would look at that and say, well, gee, maybe we shouldn't scrap this thing. But no, they don't learn anything.
Wow. Now, moving to China, although you has given hints of what you think about it. Raúl Eduardo Jaro asked if is China going to be the next hegemonic power in cultural and economic terms. And Pablo Schlosser asked if China could create a financial system parallel to the dollar and even replace it.
Okay, let me do that from the back to the front. So first of all, the question about the dollar and will something replace it? The most important thing to understand about that is how unimportant it is. The fact that a lot of international transactions are denominated in dollars really is, it's interesting, but it doesn't really contribute to U.S. power in any important way. It doesn't give the United States is able to borrow money cheaply from the world, but so are a lot of other countries. It's not really an important issue. That said, that's going to be one of the last things that China is in a position to do. In order to have a global currency, you need to have open financial markets so that people feel that they can move in and out freely, and you need to have credibility that they will that financial obligations will be honored. And China has capital controls. It doesn't have a really free domestic financial market. It's not a contender for that role. The United States may screw up its own role, but I don't think the Chinese are in a position to pick that up. China will certainly, China has proved that it's capable of making effective policy, and it's big. By depending on which measure you choose, China is either the world's biggest economy or not that far behind the United States. So that is a big player. But the thing about China is it's not, again, the rule of law, openness to foreigners and willingness to incorporate them into your system is kind of critical if you're going to be a hegemonic power. Just being a big power is not enough. You can't actually rule the world. You have to have the world feel that it can trust you. And the Chinese are autocratic system, arbitrary. It's always been the case. If you ever have had dealings with China, even on the kinds of things I've done, you know that in China, a contract is a suggestion, right? Not actually an obligation. And that's the way they deal with the world as well. Now, the United States used to be not like that. The United States used to be a country whose word you could trust, and that was critical to America's hegemonic role. And the Chinese, I think fundamentally, because of their system, are not ready to step into that position.
I guess neither is the European Union, no?
Well, the European Union could have been. If you'd asked me 15 years ago, I thought that we were headed for kind of co-dominion, in which the world would be jointly stabilized by the United States and the European Union. But the Europeans quite literally can't get their act together. They're so riven by internal division, so their march towards any kind of federalism, towards any kind of shared responsibility for their own affairs, let alone the rest of the world, has really broken down. So it's unfortunately Europe is still if we had to ask what group of societies are the best that we've seen in human history, it's still the countries of Western Europe. But their ability to play the role they ought to be playing on the world stage has been really disappointing.
Do you think, despite of what initially happened in China with all the cover-up, what's really happening, do you think China will emerge stronger from this crisis? They controlled quite well the epidemic, and they have helped other countries, actually.
Yeah, no, the fact of the matter is, well, the Chinese did engage in cover-up, and all of their problems of lack of transparency were on full display. But they also proved that they are willing to face reality and are willing to act decisively and able to act decisively, and that's something. And the contrast with the United States is on everybody's minds. The Chinese may have had this first. They may have engaged in denial for a while, but when it became clear that they had a really big problem, they moved decisively against it, and and here we are with people waving guns in the air and claiming that wearing a face mask is tyranny. So we're in bad shape.
We will now move to the third chapter, which is capitalism, and Ray Charlton asks if can the quest for endless growth continue without the destruction of natural world, or do we need to find another way? And there is another question about that. Antonio Madrigal asks if it is possible a more conscious capitalism, more solidarity, a greener world.
Okay, so the growth, people suffer from, I think, a fallacy of misplaced concreteness on growth. They think that growth has to mean more stuff, has to mean more physical. That growth means burning more fossil fuels and having more and producing more trash and all of that. And it doesn't. You can have economic growth can be, in fact, largely is qualitative rather than quantitative. It's not about having more stuff, but about having better stuff, and can actually involve a reduced environmental impact. So the idea that growth has gone away or has to go away is just misunderstanding. We can have a society that is based upon improved quality, new goods, and so on, while actually substantially reducing our environmental footprint. In fact, we have to. If we don't do that, then we're in terrible shape. So I don't think that's a. So on solidarity, look, capitalism doesn't have to be Darwinian. It doesn't have to be red in tooth and claw. If you look at well, actually, even I was going to say, if you look at the Nordic model, there you have societies that are clearly capitalistic. Most production comes from the private sector. Most economic decisions are driven by profit and loss and self-interest, but they operate within boundaries. There are regulations. There is effective labor protection, and they engage in substantial redistribution so that the outcomes are not that extreme, and that works. That can be done, and it's sustainable. The United States was less so, but the United States had much of that for a generation after World War II, and we've dismantled it, but we could remantle it. We could go back to having a society which has a fair bit of solidarity, while still remaining clearly capitalist.
Yeah, the next question, I think our listeners, they're going to be a bit surprised what you think about it, because I was surprised when I heard you last week talking about this. Ricardo Molina Vega asked, it is possible for the application of universal basic income?
Yeah. So what we've just seen, I mean, I'm puzzled that people don't see this, but what we're seeing right now in the COVID-19 crisis is a powerful case against universal basic income. Because what we've done, actually, even the United States has done this, not nearly as badly as you might think. We have a situation where something like 20% of the workforce is necessarily idled, because they're in high contact disease vector activities. And so we needed to put a bunch of people out of work one way or another. If you had a universal income that gave everybody the same amount regardless, independent of circumstances, then it would be wildly inadequate for people who have lost all of their market income, and would be giving a lot of money to people who don't actually need it. Either that, or it would have to be such a large program that it would be unaffordable. Even those of us who think the budget deficits are not a problem would say, you can't actually spend 30% of GDP providing everybody with a basic income. So what we've seen instead is that selective measures, unemployment insurance is the principal thing in the United States. European countries, a lot of it is selective subsidies to firms to keep people on payrolls. But anyway, the providing a safety net that is contingent allows you to insulate people from extreme economic harm in a way that a universal non-contingent income would not. We have the proposals for UBI in the United States were $1,000 a month and $1,000 a month. That's not enough to live on. whereas the enhanced unemployment benefits that we're offering include basic unemployment benefits plus $600 a week, which is a much bigger deal, but would be unaffordable if we were to provide that to everyone.
Yes, I recently spoke with Paul Mason, a British journalist. He said that universal income is okay in the short term because people need cash right now. But he said that in the medium and the long term, he would prefer universal basic services, free health and education at the university level, cheap housing and transport.
Well, that's a different thing. I mean, first of all, I don't think it's good in the short run. The trouble is it would be inadequate. I mean, actually, again, you can see this right now. The United States did, in fact, give everybody a check, $1,200, which is, in terms of the actual outlays, that's been very large. But in terms of the actual relief, the things that have made this lockdown tolerable, it's not that check that did it. It's the unemployment benefits, which are going to only part of the population. Now, the idea that, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said for making healthcare. We're actually going to do it by giving people, subsidizing healthcare for people rather than providing it directly. But many countries do provide it directly, and that's something that works quite well. It's just, I just don't see it happening in the United States, but it works. And some other things. Now, we'll see how far that can go. I mean, I've speculated. I've tried to figure out how much of the economy you might actually want to provide in the way of directly provided goods and services. And it could be as large as 25%. So there maybe someday we go there. I mean, our experience with publicly provided housing has in the past been problematic, but maybe we can do better at it. And certainly publicly provided healthcare works quite well where it is done, and some other things. Yeah, I mean, the transit and urban transit maybe, but you know, the reality is most people don't live in dense cities.
Yeah, Amin asks if should governments get into debt to overcome this crisis, and you are not afraid of debt.
No, I'm not afraid at all. Certainly not for the United States or other advanced countries. We have plenty of debt carrying capacity. The interest rates at which the government can borrow are ridiculously low, well below inflation, and far below inflation plus growth, which is actually what matters in terms of the burden they impose. So no, there's absolutely no reason. This is right now we actually have business investment has dropped, personal saving has soared. We have tons of savings with no place to go. And what better use for it than government borrowing to sustain people through this crisis?
You think the governments learned from the 2008 crisis and will not repeat the same things like austerity, cuts in social welfare, cuts in the health system?
No, I have to say it is remarkable. I mean, to some extent, we're seeing a different response now. But I've been watching, and on the whole, my impression is that people have not learned. I mean, there's a sort of fundamental principle I have learned from my time as a journalist, which is that to a first approximation, nobody ever admits having been wrong about anything. And people who thought that debt was a existential threat and that austerity was the answer, you would think that they would have learned from the actual experience of that was the wrong policy. But and particularly, of course, in the United States, if a Democrat becomes president, then all of the Republicans who stopped worrying about debt under Trump will suddenly declare that it's the biggest threat we face under Biden.
You will continue fighting the zombies, no?
Yeah, that's the point. They're zombies. That's the title of the book, is Arguing with Zombies, and the zombie idea is just keep shambling along, eating our brains no matter what.
Yeah, basically you don't see repeating of a period like you mentioned in your book that after the World War II, you call in your book one of the happiest, encouraging stories in human history. You see something more similar of what happened after the First World War, actually, no?
Yeah, probably. I mean, the First World War was, the First World War is interesting, was not unifying. World War II, it was not just that there was a lot big government spending, but it was big enough, long enough that it actually ended up being an instrument of solidarity, and left both the United States and elsewhere, Britain, even more so, a sense that, well, we are a society and we need to do things, and it kind of silenced for a while the voices of privilege and equality. World War I was not like that. World War I was brief, bloody, but for the United States in particular, but even other countries, but especially for the United States, it was brief, and far from producing social solidarity, it left people in a way kind of revved up, wanting to go out and kill somebody, and we had a terrific backlash. We had the Red Scare. So this is feeling, at the moment, I'm sorry to say, is feeling more like that. We have not had the kind of cohesion that comes out of a shared national effort to defeat a menace.
Yeah, moving on Latin America, we receive a lot of questions about this by Luis Ortiz, Rogelio León Torres, Mauricio Paz Barberi. Basically, they ask what is going to happen with Latin America given its strong links and single codependency of the United States.
Okay, I mean, it was interesting. During the economic crisis last time, Latin America actually weathered it pretty well, because Latin American markets were seen as a good place to invest to get away from the troubles in the north, and the external environment, commodity prices were relatively favorable, and it was just, unfortunately, this looks a little bit more like the classic situation where the United States sniffles and Latin America catches a cold. And so the economic spillover is looking bad. And let's not forget that the COVID-19 is looking like a very serious threat. And we actually have, I hate the term, but since people use it, populist leaders in the two largest Latin American nations who are both, we have a populist leader of the right in Brazil, and a populist leader of the left in Mexico, who have both been loath to take effective action. So we're going to see a lot of people dying. And Brazil seems set to become the #1 epicenter of COVID-19 within a few weeks at most. So this is not a happy time. These are, a lot of us were feeling pretty optimistic about Latin America circa 2013 or so, and it's not looking so good right now.
Yeah, in more broader terms, Sebastián Dalmaso asks, what should be the strategies for the developing country to do after this crisis?
Oh, I think we have learned, first of all, we've learned that there are no magic bullets. I mean, I've been through now, from import substitution to neoliberalism to whatever it was that we thought that was working during the under Lula in Brazil. There are no magic bullets. It's all comes back to, you have to just try and do as many things right as you can. You certainly need a social safety net to the extent, it can't be a Western Europe level social safety net, because developing countries can't afford to be that generous, but they can still do a lot. You need to provide an environment in which business does feel that it's safe to invest. You need to do what you can on education and infrastructure, and then, but I have to say, it's hard. There's, not that long. Well, there's the old joke about Brazil. Brazil is the country of the future and always will be, and unfortunately, that has turned out to be true again this past decade. We saw Brazil looking pretty good, and then politically and economically, they fell apart again. So it is troubling.
Yeah, finally, to end in a more positive point, if it's possible, Gustavo Flores says, what are the positive effects the utility crisis might bring? And Ignacio Javier Fernandez actually asks, Is there any cause for hope?
Oh yeah, I mean the potentials are still. There are a lot of good things in the world. There are things like technology is our friend in important ways. Not just IT, which gets overhyped, but is still a big thing. But I think about climate change is still the ultimate existential threat out there, but technology has been very much our friend. It's the possibility of a low or zero emissions economy has never looked more realistic than it does now. There's a lot of ways in which our societies have gotten better too. I mean, like this backdrop of what you see in the United States, we see horrible leadership at the top, but we also see a surprisingly tolerant, open-minded society that's pushing back against that. So I think in a lot of ways we are morally better than we used to be. So with the possibilities of making the world a better place with good leadership are still there. And, sitting from the US perspective, a few months ago, it was looking, unfortunately, alarmingly certain that Donald Trump would be reelected and that democracy in America would die. And right now, it looks, if anything, the odds are tilted the other way, and maybe we do manage to reclaim our historical legacy and become again the country we were supposed to be. So I'm not without hope. I'm full of fear, but I'm not without hope.
Yeah, actually, thinking about that, I think one of the biggest political stories of this whole crisis is the decentralization of power, and how local governments and how local mayors have fought off authoritarian presidents and authoritarian regimes to try to do better.
That's right. There's a lot of that. I mean, you can see it in many places, and you can see it certainly in the United States. It's kind of remarkable. It's funny at this point. The Republican Party is desperately searching for a place to hold its convention, because they want to hold a convention of lots of people without masks cheering, and as far as we can tell, no major city wants them, and they can't force cities to, or they probably can't force a city to have a super spreader event for COVID-19. So we're seeing the virtues of decentralization in a kind of funny but very stark fashion right now.
Mr. Paul Krugman, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you.